There are many different ways to develop punching power, and the majority of martial artists and also coaches will look to targeted drills such as weightlifting in order to do this. Now those are incredibly important of course, but there is a skewed sense of prioritization in terms of when and how they should be utilised. And so in this video I'm going to be sharing some slight tweaks that you can make to the execution of your punches that will 10x your power output. So in order to simplify this, let's consider power development to be split into two broad categories. One is direct methods aimed at developing the muscles that hopefully will translate into power, and the other is technical proficiency in development and having a really deep understanding of the biomechanics of how to execute that technique efficiently. And before we dive into the bulk of the video guys, I want to let you know that I'm once again offering one-to-one coaching at a discounted rate for a limited time only. So I tend to work with people in a couple of different ways. The first is just a straight Zoom call where we basically have a conversation about areas that you might be struggling with, and the second is where you'll send me some clips of you training and then I'll do a screen recorded critique telling you what you can do in order to improve those. So it's the same booking form, the link's in the description to book those calls, and you just need to let me know which of the services you would like in the information section. Now most people think that power is like an 80-20 strength to technique ratio, and they're focusing predominantly upon raw strength, often neglecting the technical work when really it should be the other way around. Hypothetically, if you try to build raw strength onto a weak or non-existent foundation, then it's highly likely that you'll never be able to achieve the power level of somebody that has stellar technique but has never done any strength training in their life. And this is why slim guys that have amazing technique will always be able to outpunch a big stiff bro bodybuilder that thinks it comes all from the muscles. So the reason that solid technique translates to power isn't that it just looks nice, it's because that person's able to effectively utilize the kinetic chain. And this makes that punch more efficient because there's little to no wasted energy, and so it will happen quicker, which results in it landing with greater force by default. Pure strength training, on the other hand, only provides what I would call bonus power. It gives only incremental improvements, and not only that, it won't even work if your technique isn't good to begin with. Like for instance, if you've been doing a lot of push work in order to develop your shoulders, if you punch without twisting sufficiently through the hips and torso, you won't even be able to utilize that strength you've developed because you're positioned incorrectly to make it count. Now when I say technical work, I mean beyond just having good form on your punches. That's a given and should be something that you're continuously working on. What I'm talking about here are small changes that you can implement to your punching technique that actually take no effort and will instantly produce more power from your body, unlike raw strength training which takes time to develop. Now a great deal of this comes from just simply commanding your body to do it once you've got great technique, and a phrase I will die on the hill for is, in order to hit powerfully you have to try to hit powerfully. So that's the starting point, is training with sufficient effort, because without that nothing else is going to happen. And that doesn't mean constantly of course, I'm talking about just enough to teach your body how you wish that punch to be executed. Now that probably sounds way too simplistic upon first hearing, but you wouldn't believe the amount of guys who I see who actually have got really good technique, but they're just a little bit lazy when they train. Now once you're doing that, there are a few small tweaks that I'm going to be breaking down now that you can implement to profoundly optimize your punches for power. And in order to demonstrate this, we're going to focus upon the cross or the straight right. But before we do that, I'm not saying this is how you should always execute all of your punches from now on, because different scenarios require you to adjust the technique accordingly. I'm talking about here how to maximize power output. But what's just as important is knowing when to do it this way and when not to, so just bear that in mind as well. Now the first thing is that you need to get into the habit of always projecting the shoulder forward on your cross, more than you think you should, and this is to ensure that we're delivering the maximum force through the body at the end of the punch. The best way to do this is during shadow boxing, and with anyone I coach I always heavily emphasize that they need to project their shoulders more, especially when they're finishing a combo with a cross. Again, this doesn't mean that this is like the new way that that punch should always now be executed. It's to condition our body to be able to do it that way. And if you overemphasize it in shadow boxing without any resistance, then it's highly likely you'll execute it more effectively when it comes to hitting something like a heavy bag. And that's because people subtly change their technique when it comes to hitting something like a bag, and this is natural and everybody does it. One of the main reasons this occurs is because you're subconsciously aware you've got a big target in front of you basically, so you need to account for that range. And many people will shy away from really punching into and through the target, instead kind of touching it but with insufficient energy behind it. Now what you want to aim for is to be able to have a lot of power wherever you're positioned, whether you're close to the target or far away. And this is achieved via specific positioning of the body, particularly the arms and the shoulders. And when we're far enough out, this is easy because we all naturally extend our arms until it reaches the target. However, when we're closer, naturally the punch has to be adjusted somewhat to account for the change in position. But what the majority of people do is shorten in the wrong place, and instead they keep their arms somewhat straight yet reposition their shoulder further back, meaning they aren't rotating enough through the hips stress, which then makes hitting with power almost impossible. But instead, the management of range happens by bending the arm and repositioning the shoulder. So this way we're still able to punch right through the target. And this is the way many boxers will knock out their opponents. It's called a short straight right, and someone who's incredible at this is Mike Tyson. So just look at how close he is here to his opponent when executing the cross, and from there he's got all that distance to extend his shoulder right through the guy's face, in this case almost decapitating him. And so it's about learning to push all of your energy into the target regardless of what range you're at, and this is absolutely vital. And to do that, like I mentioned before, you need to make sure that your shoulder's in position and get all of your weight forward. Something else that's often neglected as well is the very last part of the punch before the final delivery. Now, we're taught in boxing not to punch from the arms and instead rotate through the different body parts, so the power comes entirely from that rotation. However, this is not technically 100% true. You obviously don't want to punch completely from the arms like a total beginner without any bodily rotation. However, the very last muscles of the body in the kinetic chain that should be engaged after the feet, hips and torso should be the shoulders and arms, in which you slightly elevate the shoulders to stack the rest of your body behind the punch and then aggressively force the arm forward into the target. So it's not that we don't want to punch using the arms at all. We do in fact want to do this, but it just needs to be at the right time. And this, in my experience, is the most neglected part of the punch by the majority of people, even those with considerable experience. And I'd say this is probably because they've got a lot of reps under their belt and certainly do know punching technique well, so they just kind of forget about that last part. Because if you're doing the rest correctly, then you're still definitely going to have a lot of power. But if you work at really engaging the shoulders and the lats, it will result in a more ferocious punch that has devastating stopping power. And lastly, to make that even more effective, a little hack that you can do when executing combos is to aggressively engage the muscles of the non-punching arm when you retract them back to your guard in order to create even more rotational force. Now, most people know it's one of the foundational principles that you should retract your non-punching arm back to your guard when you strike, but not many people actually put extra effort into doing it. So the way most people punch, even those who are technically proficient, is they will execute the cross and the hand will come back to the guard, but it'll be done subconsciously and in a relaxed manner, and that's because all of their focus is on the actual punch that they're executing. However, when executing, say, a jab cross, I found that I'm able to generate way more power when I retract the jabbing hand back to my guard aggressively, rather than just letting it come back without thinking about it at the same time I execute the cross, so it creates much greater torque throughout the body. It's like if you imagine the total potential power level of a punch to be 100%. When you perform a regular cross without paying much attention to that retracting arm, let's say you could generate something like 60 to 70% power, because really you're only utilizing just over half of the muscles. But when you retract aggressively as well, that will instantly make that cross gain about 10 to 20% power, because you're utilizing more of your body in order to create that torque. And you can do this on almost all of your punches, like when you're executing it across to a lead hook, for example. Instead of just forgetting about that cross when it comes time to do the hook, retract it back hard and use it to rotate your body more quickly and aggressively into that hook. And not only will it result in greater power, but it will most likely make the technique feel easier to perform as well. And lastly, for just Super Saiyan levels of power, you can add all of that previous stuff onto a shuffle forward, and this is kind of like what Deontay Wilder does. So there's a type of jab that boxers will often use that's different to the regular jab used to just feel out opponents, and it's often referred to as a stiff jab. A simple way to describe it is it's just a really aggressive, forceful jab where you push yourself forward, stacking your body behind the jabbing arm and unleashing all of the energy into that target. But most people kind of just leave it there, so they execute that stiff jab and that's it. But what you want to do is follow that up with a cross that's just as aggressive and utilizes all of the other principles I listed previously, because you've already generated a ton of forward momentum. And then when this punch lands on the target, you'll naturally brace yourself by pushing into the ground in order to deliver all of that power through it. Now, what I'd recommend when trying this out is to make sure that your punching technique is already very good, because when you apply all of the things I mentioned in this video, you will be generating a hell of a lot of force. And even for me, when I go for, big power despite my technique being good already, sometimes it can be a little bit stressful on the body, especially when you're hitting a really heavy bag that doesn't move much. So if you're going to do this, I'd recommend trying to implement just one of these things at a time to begin with, so that you can get the feel of it, because it does also require a bit of muscle memory, in the sense that you're kind of teaching your body a new way to do the punch. And that's what I refer to as mindful repetitions, as you've probably seen me mention in my other videos. So these are the little things that I personally find really interesting when I train. I'm always trying to figure out, small ways and little incremental improvements that I can make to my techniques. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you would like to book a coaching call, you can find the link below, and I will see you in the next video.